welcome to the special edition of the CNBC TV 18 appointment. I'm Shereen Bhan, and I'm in a room full of some of the most powerful CEOs in the country to talk about the global aspirations of Indian brands. Joining me to take the proceedings forward, the CEO of WPP, Sir Martin Sorrell. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. I'm not going to go through the introductions because, as I said, I have 12 of India's leading CEOs with me here in this room. But very quickly, we are going to today talk about the global aspirations of Indian brands and how MNC brands are adopting to the culture of India, and what are the lessons that Indian brands can learn from MNC brands who, of course, expanded into different geographies across the world. The Prime Minister, in his maiden Independence Day speech, made a clarion call to position India as a manufacturing hub. He said, "Come, make in India, sell anywhere in the world." But perhaps that only tells us half of the story. Yes, we would like to position India as a manufacturing hub. Yes, we would like foreign investors to come and invest in India and set up manufacturing facilities in India. But do we want to be a nation only of consumers, or do we want to be a nation of producers as well? Do we want to be a nation that nurtures intellectual property? Is that what we aspire to do? Because that, in a sense, is the essence and the foundation of brand building. And are we putting enough focus and emphasis on creating and nurturing intellectual property in this country? Since we are talking about global aspirations, let me start by quoting a provocative statement made by one of India's leading FMCG companies. Vaisi Deveshwar, the chairman of ITC, has been making this pitch for the last several years, and in his most recent address to shareholders at ITC's AGM, he said, "We don't possess globally competitive brands. In FY12, 306 listed companies paid royalty and technical fee aggregating to almost 35,000 crore rupees. India's market space has been abdicated to foreign-owned brands." Is that a reality check, Martin Sorrell? Before we talk global, can we at least talk about creating competitive world-class Indian brands who first cater to the domestic market?
Well, we have our top 50 here. That's the reason I'm sitting in front of you being asked provocative questions, is we have our top 50, and a large proportion of those top 50 brands are not MNCs, foreign multinationals, Gaijin multinationals. They're domestic companies that have been very successful in an Indian context and are becoming increasingly successful on a worldwide context. I think one of the surprising things about our research on the top 50 Indian brands for the first time is that such a large proportion of them are local brands. Now, we focus on the listed sector because those are the only statistics that we can get have been fully audited, whereas the private sector, the unlisted sector, is not a sector where we can get the data. So it's a little bit skewed to that way. But I think the remarkable thing is the strong Indian brands that are in that top 50, and I anticipate they will be even greater. One other point. 1.2 billion people in India. Your own channel celebrated, or CNBC globally celebrated its 25th anniversary.
We're on the verge of celebrating 15 years here in India.
Right, so congratulations. But you did a 25 years forecast, and that forecast showed that China would be the largest economy in the world, US would be second, India would be third, but India would be the most populous country in the world, about 1.4 billion in 25 years' time, on the assumption that China one-baby policy doesn't shift or shift any more than it has. If that is the case, that gives Indian companies a massive opportunity, as long as we can shift the basis of consumption, as long as we can increase the lower middle class and middle class. Because if you said to me, what is the primary driver of the success of domestic companies and foreign MNCs, it's the growth of the lower middle class and the middle class, or however you define it, just as we've seen in Brazil, just as we've seen in Russia, and just as we've seen in China.
So you believe that Indian companies or Indian brands today are poised to be globally competitive and globally relevant?
Far be it from me to give any of the people in this room who are far more illustrious than me any advice, but here goes, right? And the advice I would give is, if I'm a domestic brand, is exhaust the opportunities domestically first, because global expansion, as the ITC comments indicate, is not easy. You know, we've got people who have expanded already globally, but whether you do it organically, which is stronger, by the way, than acquisition, but more difficult. So first of all, examine what's happening and look at the growth or the potential growth in the Indian market since the early 90s. You know, it stuttered a bit in the last 2 or 3 years,
right,
but we all hope post-Modi in the election that it will regain its mojo and grow even faster.
Okay, there's several points that you've made there. So let me start by getting our panelists in. And Pavan Munjal, I want to pick up on the point that Martin Sorrell made here today, that brands that have succeeded or achieved a dominant position in the Indian marketplace are perhaps best poised to look globally. And that's exactly what you're attempting to do with Hero Moto. You've decided to go the organic route. You're looking at setting up facilities and making your foray first into the easier markets, some would say, markets like LATAM. What has the experience been so far? And do you believe that you've exhausted the domestic opportunity and hence the time is right for you now to look at global markets?
No, we've not exhausted domestic opportunities. We continue to explore and go out there into the Indian markets, deeper into the rural markets, rural areas, and small towns. Indian markets continues to grow, and there is still a lot of potential. But we are in a dominant position in the Indian market, and this was the right time for us to go into the international markets. You're right, we are going into the easier markets per se right now, LATAM and Africa. From my point of view, low-hanging fruits. Also, we can take our current products, take these products into those markets without major changes, without major modifications. So far, the going has been good, and we are not just going the organic route, we are also looking at acquisition opportunities.
But what kind of acquisitions would you be looking at? Are you looking at acquiring facilities, manufacturing facilities, or are you looking at acquiring brands?
Both. Acquiring facilities who have a good brand. That's what we are looking at. For instance, in Argentina, that's what we are trying to do. But in Colombia, we are going the organic route. We are putting up a factory there. We are manufacturing. And we are doing very well so far.
What is the target that you've set for yourself as far as the export market is concerned?
Well,
and what is the big challenge that you face today as you start your export foray?
We've set ourselves in the first 5 years from when we started about 18 months ago, 10% of our total sales should come from the international markets is what we are trying to achieve. And also, the plan is to go into as many countries as possible so that the brand goes across continents, across the world to really make it a global brand.
So what is the brand challenge? Because clearly low-cost arbitrage is not something that you can continue to enjoy because the Chinese are going to cut prices if they aren't doing that already. So what is going to be the brand advantage, if I could ask you?
Well, the Chinese are already there all across the globe.
Yeah.
We are, in fact, going into markets where the Chinese are there and at the other end where the Japanese are there. So we are trying to go into a level where we have to compete both with the higher priced Japanese and the lower priced Chinese. We are going there with quality, we are going there with durability, we are going there with performance and also the relevant required prices.
Aditya Puri, let me ask you, we've seen examples of a B2C company trying to address their global aspirations, entering newer markets. But does it make sense for somebody like HDFC Bank to look at global plans at this point in time, to have global aspirations? Would it be a viable business idea for you?
Considering that we don't think ourselves to be geniuses, I think the global financial market has enough crap to sort out over the next 3 years. So we don't necessarily want to participate in that. But coming to the second point that Martin raised, the opportunity in India for us is so large that we won't probably exhaust it for the next 5 to 7 years. If you superimpose on that, the changes that are taking place in terms of firstly technology, the profusion of the media, the segmentation of the customers, what he wants, then, and we can work our advantages along those lines. So if you see the changes, the control is with the customer. You need tremendous amount of customer segmentation. Each one needs are different, whether it's rural, whether it's urban, whether it's right into the interior, whether it's substituting the money lender.
Sure.
So we can have a situation where we can understand what he wants from the brand.
So one is the domestic opportunity, and clearly the domestic opportunity for a company like yours and the banking sector in India is large. But besides that, the competitive landscape globally, the kind of financial muscle that global players within this space enjoy, would it make sense for you to even consider 5 or 6 or 10 years down the line to make a bid?
Of course it will. The financial industry is in turmoil. So when we come to the opportunity here, you must understand 60% of India lives in semi-urban and rural India. We haven't even started taking the products there, and we're very glad that over the last 4 years, we've taken not only the products, the technology, the marketing, understanding how you go through big data to semi-urban and rural India, and approximately 17% of our sales come from there. We expect this to be 50% over the next 5 years. The ability to digitize the entire change that is taking place in terms of being able to have appropriate analytics and deliver through changes in technology to far-flung areas. 65% of our demographic is below 65%. And we don't have the burden of what is happening to financial services there. 5 years from now, we're a much bigger company. I know which shit I'm putting my hand in, because just now, I might fly with it. When it's cleaned up, I have a price to book of 4, and I have a margin and a cost to revenue of 40%. Then I will take what I want.
So you do have global aspirations?
Step by step, as they say in Guju.
Shivakumar, let me ask you, and I want to come back to the statement made by Vaisi Deveshwar about the fact that foreign brands like yours have pretty much left Indian brands with very little room to grow, or maybe Indian brands haven't tried hard enough or fought hard enough, or it's just a David versus Goliath battle that they're up against, and hence the space has been abdicated to foreign brands like yours, which results in an outflow of money by way of royalties and technical fee out of India, impacts our current account deficit, and so on and so forth. In your experience today, are Indian companies, are Indian manufacturers, whether it's B2B or B2C companies, thinking enough about world-class, globally competitive, relevant Indian brands?
Most consumers don't look at brands as Indian or X or Y or American.
Sure.
There are a few connections there, but people don't do that. As long as the brand is competitive and it offers some great value, the consumer will buy it. Okay, this bogey of Indian brands versus foreign brands has been going on for 30 years. Okay, I don't subscribe to it. A brand says something which satisfies some innate needs of the consumer.
Right.
As long as you do that right, you're fine. It can be
But
20%.
that's the point he's making, that
Absolutely.
intellectual property is not something that Indian companies are investing in.
Yes. So if you invest in intellectual property, which gives you an edge in innovation and design and packaging, things like that which matter to the consumer, then you will be as competitive as any other brand. So
Is that happening is the question.
Yes, I think it's happening. I think it's happened for 30 years, Shereen. Nirma taught everybody a big lesson 30 years ago. Okay, and I think many healthcare brands, many, let's take jewelry brands, many brands in apparel, I think there are lots of good examples there. So I don't think we should be shy of that.
Can I just sort of come to your aid from this, this battering on my left?
Hardly.
I think it's fair to say that many multinational companies, when I talk to country heads or leaders on, talk about their competition not being fellow MNCs, but being local companies. Whereas at the global headquarters, people tend to think of their competition being the big MNCs. What I think demonstrates is that at a local level, at a country level, in India, I think they're good examples, as you've just said, of Indianizing these foreign brands and making them locally relevant and locally successful. But the real competition, particularly in the FMCG sector, we find, is from the local companies that are building their brands in a different way, more awareness and more distribution, less brand loyalty, where the MNCs have exactly the reverse, which is more brand loyalty and less awareness and distribution. So the local competitors are really the threats.
In fact, yeah, I would say India is a hyper-competitive market. In every category, you have 300 to 400 brands. The explosion of regional media has given huge access to the market, in whether it's a Tamil Nadu or a Bihar or wherever it is. Okay, so I don't think Indian brands should ever think of themselves as Indian brands or origin of India, as much as I serve the consumer and I do a better job than some other brand.
Okay, Rajananand, let me ask you this. Is it going to be easier for technology-based companies to have global aspirations? I mean, we've got a bunch of Indian startups, the InMobis of the world, who actually started off thinking about global markets and not just limiting themselves to the Indian market. Do you believe because the threshold barriers are perhaps lower when it comes to technology or technology-based businesses, that Indian brands are perhaps going to have much more successful times in the global marketplace?
You know, the most valuable public Indian company is a technology company. Tata Consulting Services, 80 billion market cap. And the market cap of TCS exceeds the combined market cap of Hewlett-Packard, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Two of the new age internet companies that we all talk about, and one of the most one of the best companies ever built in the technology industry, right? And this is actually an Indian brand. So I think when you look at technology brands, you have B2B and B2C brands.
Right.
I think what we're seeing is probably technology is an industry where you could build a global company out of India without having a large domestic presence. I mean, obviously the IT services companies have proved it in spades, but we are seeing it with InMobi. InMobi is #1 or #2
Absolutely.
in a large number of markets now, including China, many markets in Europe, and now making significant headway.
And that was the strategy from the day,
yeah,
from the
and their
first
business
day.
in India is meaningful, but not very significant, right? And I think this is a company out of Bangalore to become the second largest mobile ad network in the world is really amazing. So I think what we're seeing in technology is we have great engineering talent. Historically, we haven't had a great product sense, but companies like InMobi, like Zomato and others are now proving that if we can bring that product sense, combine it with great engineering, and in an internet-driven world, you can actually distribute globally, right? And those are the kinds of things we are saying. So I'm actually very, very bullish about Indian technology companies, not only to win in India, Micromax being the most recent example of a phenomenal success story, yeah. Indian brands taken on global MNCs, beating them in spades, but also actually building very large, very valuable global brands.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up the Micromax example, and I'm going to get you, Shiv, to also get in on this, because when we talk about intellectual property, Micromax doesn't enjoy or can't leverage the promise of intellectual property in that sense. It's been betting on low-cost arbitrage. You now have the Xiaomis and the Xionis of the world flooding the Indian market. What happens then to a brand like Micromax in that situation?
Yeah. So as long as your competitors allow you a headroom for pricing, then that situation will last. Okay, so let's take the competitor is priced 100, Micromax can do something at 50 for the same product feature quality, then that's fine. The moment those people come down, yeah. then you're out of the game because you have not sufficiently invested in R&D, and design by virtue of the nature of the mobile segment will last you 12 months at best.
So isn't this then the big problem that a lot of B2C brands in India face today, that not enough is being thought about R&D, not enough is being thought about intellectual property?
You're right. It's simply a question of, does the Indian entrepreneur think of business as business, okay, as opposed to the brand as a business? So a lot of the thinking, let's take from Japan, from Korea, from China, who've actually gone up the value stream, they've thought about brands. Okay, we think much more dhanda and business, and that's the reason you don't go up the value chain.
Okay, Kritika, let me ask you now, because we're talking about technology and technology companies from India with global aspirations, but let's talk about the domestic opportunity, and let's talk about creating Indian technology brands. Are we likely to see an Indian origin social network? We've just, in the mobile messaging space, had one Indian brand emerge in the form of Hike. Are we likely to see more of that?
Are we going to see another Facebook emerge out of India? Or your question was just, are we going to see another big brand emerge? Are we going to see big brands emerge out of India? Absolutely, yes. I think technology actually makes building brands both locally easier and building brands globally easier as well. Because for once, with technology platforms, you have global marketing platforms. So I'm excited about what technology enables and helps Indian brands grow globally.
And you do see many more of the Hike kind of launches in India, Indian brands that cater to not just the domestic market to start with perhaps, but eventually maybe other emerging markets.
Yeah, the whole need to connect, to share is a basic consumer need, and so we are going to see more and more applications, products, services that cater to that need, and we're excited to see that whole category rise.
Let me come to you, sir, and talk to you about what Castrol is doing. And I was having an interesting conversation with the man who runs India's largest tire company, Apollo Tyres, and they're now looking at going global. They've done several acquisitions. They're making big inroads into Europe through an organic facility, as well as exploring inorganic options as well. But in the ITES space, it's perhaps easier. But what do you believe is going to be the challenge for organic growth, especially for Indian manufacturers as they look at global opportunities?
So I think firstly, being a representative for an MNC brand, as you classified, I think the challenge here is a little bit different. So we have a Castrol brand. Castrol was available in the globe before it came to India. So I think the key question for us is that how can Indian arms of MNC influence the choice that the brand development is going to take for the global corporation? And I think there's a huge opportunity for India to become the center of leadership and thought excellence in many categories. I'll give you an example. So thanks to Pavanji, motorcycles is a key category in India. So we've now convinced the parent company to move the global R&D and thought leadership of motorcycles to India, which means all future brand developments of the motorcycle category are going to be led by thought leadership from India. I think it's about how you can convince, and I think for Castrol it's a little bit easier, because we are today one of the top 3 contributors to global profit. So in a sense, we're seen large. And I think also seen over the next 10 or 15 years, 80% of the growth is going to come from India and China for a category like lubricants. So we're big today and we're likely to be big tomorrow. So it's easy for us to be able to influence the choices that the corporation makes. But I think in it lies a huge advantage of how we can use India as that center of excellence.
You know, it's an interesting point that you make, and a lot of people talk about this business of think global but act local. And Manu Anand, let me ask you that in the context of this business of thinking global but acting local, empowering the local leadership, and one of the failings of a lot of multinational companies in the initial years was not empowering the local leadership enough. As Indian companies now look at charting out a course in global markets, what is it that you think they need to do about empowering the local leadership, this country office and the country officer, and the relevance of the country office and the country officer? In your experience, how should it go forward?
I think one of the starting points really needs to be to get a team that understands the local market and is local. So one of the things if Indian companies go out is really to make sure that the teams firstly reflect a fair cross-section of the population of the country in which you're operating, as opposed to taking the easy route and exporting the Indian managers out to really look after your business there at the very first place. But the second, I think, is just immersing yourselves into local insights and truly understanding what differentiates the local habits in that market, whatever be the product or the product form that you're working to, and trying to see how that best fits your business model, your business proposition, and your brand, rather than trying to take what you have as it is and superimpose it there with Indian managers running it and trying to establish that market.
Is the superimposition the biggest challenge that not just Indian companies face, but global companies like yours face in trying to do business and grow your brands here?
Exactly. And until you've sufficiently understood the local market and localized the model, be it the communication, product form, taste, whatever that is, to really suit the local palate or the local consumer, you really don't get that, hit that tipping point to become a scale brand. So I think that localization of the identity is very, very critical.
Just one thing that we see going on, and it's heightened in the last 6, 12 months. And Jeff Immelt, actually, I heard the strongest articulation of this at the Microsoft CEO's conference in Seattle a few months ago. And that is, what we see is more global centralization, power certainly concentrating, but a leaner, fitter, more networked, more technologically based center, smaller center, but powerful. And given the fact that somebody like Coca-Cola, we operate in 110 countries, Coca-Cola operates in 220 countries. How can you, from Atlanta, for example, think about 220 countries? How can you, from London or New York, in our case, think about 110? I don't know how many Mondelez or PepsiCo countries operate in, but so the question is, how do you do that? So you give more local focus, and you take out regional management. And that's because the regional management is seen as being a buffer, preventing decisions coming down and preventing decisions or information coming up. And I think that's the big change that we're starting to see, less regionalization, more central, and more local.
Okay.
That's right. And just to build on that, I think you will get enough similarities that way between certain kinds of markets, which may not be clustered necessarily geographically.
Let me get KBS Anand, the Asian Paints, into this conversation as well. You've got a microphone right there. You know, we're talking about entering commoditized markets in a sense. We're talking about 300, 400 players, not just in the Indian market, but when you're competing globally across different categories, perhaps 300 to 400 players in a segment like tires. What then is going to be the key differentiator as far as an Indian brand is concerned? What is your USP? What is going to be unique about what you sell in the global marketplace that's going to make you relevant? And how do you stand out?
Actually, the global market is similar to India because India is actually not one market. Every segment of India is extremely different. You got to understand what the consumer really wants and be the first to cater to that need, whether you're in India or abroad. You will build a brand.
But it's unlikely that in most categories you're going to have the first mover advantage.
Yeah, but the consumer is continuously changing. The consumer of today is not the consumer of tomorrow. We see that in every category. So the consumer is not stagnant. The first mover definitely has an advantage. He definitely has a brand. But you have to sense how the consumer is moving, how his needs move. And if you attempt to cater to those needs, you get advantages, even in other markets. But going into highly developed markets, it's a little more difficult because India is still not seen as a very strong brand by itself. So Indian products, manufactured products, are not seen necessarily as top of the line. Japan has reached that category, but even the Chinas of the world haven't reached there yet. So that would take time and a lot of examples of manufacturing products delivering that value to the consumer. But if you go to the developing countries and you understand them, many of them are closer to India, you are actually in a better position than many of the global brands in terms of developing and delivering value for the consumers in these emerging countries. And you have greater potential of becoming a global brand there.
So limit your aspirations to the emerging markets that are similar to India to at least start with.
Yeah, to start with, yes. Because there are two, actually the biggest move to globalization has come from the last 15, 20 years. The MNCs have come into India and have taught us to be competitive. If you can survive in India, actually you can survive in most markets.
If you can survive in India, you can survive anywhere. Harit Nagpal, let me ask you this. What do you make of an Indian brand trying to go for a developed market first, because then it would perhaps become easier to look down?
I sense a bit of an obsession with a brand is equal to something that comes out of a wrapper, is sold off a retail shelf, or you can walk out of a store holding it or driving in it. So either a mobile phone or an automobile. Now that's not really true, because if that's our obsession, then we can never, it's our obsession is to sell a soap or a shampoo to the US. For example, when we were growing up, and that wasn't very long ago, don't go by my hair, we had two brands of shampoo. Both of them came in two variants each, and they came in two sizes. And at that point in time, the American market was running probably the same number of brands, variants, and pack sizes as we run today. Now, if my aim is to go and sell a shampoo to the US, an Indian shampoo to the US for the mass market, not for the Indian diaspora, then I think I'm trying to beat them at baseball. It's not possible.
That was the question that I was asking.
Yeah, so that's just not possible. However, brands that have grown out of their home countries in the past, if you study the history of that, most of them have been good at what they were doing well in the countries they were doing well, and have found markets who had a need for that product, but they were not good at that. Let me look at some of the Indian categories, the three categories that distinctly come out in India. One is heavy engineering. Look at the BPO industry. I mean, First Source was being run by CII. These were brands by themselves. They were not commodity hot shops. They were brands by themselves. They had their SLAs, they had their specializations, they had their pieces. Then we came to the IT. You talked about the TCS part. There is TCS, there's Infosys, there's Wipro, there's many others. And the new market, the new industry that's emerging on the basis of all this is everybody's talking big data. But where's the big data going to be crunched? The big data is going to be crunched in your backyard. So, you got to pick up your advantages and not try to sell soap to the US.
That's exactly the point that I was making. I'd like people here to come in on that what is going to be the key differentiator? You can't, sell baseball to the US or sell soap to the US. What is going to be the big differentiator? Let me get you to comment on that, Molly.
Just reverse the thing and say which foreign companies have succeeded most in India. I mean, most of them,
half of them
many of them have been first movers. 1948 is when Cadbury Dairy Milk was launched here. Yeah, it was a first mover. Now, and if you just see a Samsung, which you say must have come 15 years back, their big waves came when flat screen market got created in India, mobile phone market got created in India. If these markets hadn't got created, and if we were still selling washing machines and radios, they wouldn't be as big as they are here today. So I think the fact of the matter is you have to look for a tip of a spear to enter a market. You can't bludgeon your way into a market. You have to look for a tip of a spear. The most powerful way to find a tip of a spear is either a first mover or a place where you have decisive advantage. Yeah.
So otherwise, where are those categories? Where are those categories? Where are those sectors that you think that Indian companies do enjoy a decisive advantage and perhaps can bring something unique to the table?
I mean, the way I would see it is, I think there are a set of things. I think all categories are evolving, as KBS mentioned. It's really to be able to say, what's the next evolution of the category? And can you enter the next evolution of the category as opposed to the previous evolution of the category? And you can do this in any category. So I think that's the mindset we have to bring to say what's the next evolution and how do we get there before the incumbents get there.
So that's what you need to capitalize on, and that's the competitive weakness that you can perhaps build on. Martin Sorrell, which are the sectors, which are the niches, which are the categories that you see Indian companies doing well in globally?
That I think they will?
Yes,
or
that you think they will. We've already spoken about several of the examples. Well, technology essentially is the big one. Auto is another space where we've seen success.
I may be a little bit biased, but I would say it technology, engineering, IP, those areas. I mean, I remember being asked, you know, what was I most worried about? Our competition, our direct competition, our indirect competition, or the startup in Silicon Valley, and I said the startup in Bangalore. So at the end of the day, I think probably that area is there. Now, the Prime Minister has said make it in India, not made in India. There's a subtle difference,
sure.
I guess,
yeah,
between it in India. But if you're making stuff in India and the currency devalues to the extent that it has, that makes it rather tough to do it. However, from a technological basis, you don't necessarily have that disadvantage because a lot of it is the brain power. I think that's the area where I would focus on when I look at the strength of the brands and look at the opportunities. So it's the Indian Googles, the Indian Facebooks, the Indian Twitters.
You know, we were talking about, Supriya, let me ask you this. We've had two examples of Indian companies doing large acquisitions. We've had the Airtel example of entering Africa by way of an acquisition, and we've got the Tata Motors example of acquiring Jaguar Land Rover, and Jaguar Land Rover is essentially keeping Tata Motors alive at this point in time. Do you believe that when it comes to significant expansion into global markets, it is going to be largely inorganic, it is going to be acquisition-led?
Mr. Sorrell said at the start that he advises Indian companies to build their brands here and for the next 10 years, and then go think about abroad. I partially agree with him. The Economist has a view on that. We did a research 4 years back on developing markets and their opportunities globally. And the first thing that the research says is that it is not anymore about a matter of choice. Indian brands, and I'm talking about MNC brands,
yeah.
Indian brands have no choice but to think global. And the reason for that is that, yes, there is opportunities, but the fact is that if you think about the fact that India and China, the way they're opening up, you're not going to stop the MNC brands coming into India. It's going to competition, hyper competition, someone said, is going to get worse.
Let me start getting wrap-up comments, and let me start with you, sir. The big challenge that we face today, regulatory differences across different geographies. From a regulatory point of view, as Indian companies look at doing business abroad, emission norms, so on and so forth, what is going to be the big challenge that Indian companies and managements must take note of?
I think understanding regulatory frameworks across the globe is going to be a huge challenge. But I don't think it's an insurmountable challenge. These are capabilities that you can buy in. I think just to build on some of the thoughts that have been put in the room, it seems that as Indian brands go global, a certain inorganic play will be a part of it. I think we've heard today from the people who are looking at growing global. I think the other aspect of it is that you've also got to then develop competitive advantages in managerial capability. I mean, you spoke about the JLR. JLR has been sort of part of many different companies. Nowhere has it prospered as much as prospered under
Tata Motors. Yeah.
So I think there is another core sense of capability that Indian companies can bring as they think of inorganic options, is what is the managerial skill or competence I can bring to bear that will give me a competitive advantage.
Harit Nagpal, wrap-up comments from you.
On the issue of regulation, etc., I don't think it's any different here than is in any other emerging market. Don't forget, we were socialists till 20 years ago in this country. We are socialists in our head even now, even though we may be talking capitalism. So it'll take us another 20 years to become pure capitalists. So I'm not fussed about that.
Okay. Aditya Puri, you said maybe 10 years down the line, you will have global aspirations of positioning yourself as a global bank. Not today, but maybe a decade later.
Could be earlier as well. If you take off from Martin, the point is this. India is going to change so fast that you are going to develop new models for the lower middle class and the bottom of the pyramid, as well as right at the top. And those can be exported. So when I said, when do I want to go? I need to understand this is my brand. What does the customer want from me? How do I deliver it to him best? And the day I'm the lowest cost, and the day I can deliver a product that's delivered globally, much better than anybody else, that coupled with what is happening on the digital space, which is completely changing both financial services and marketing. So I think the opportunities will come. I think we need to be strong. But obsession to just go out and say, take the brand, you got to take the business overseas, not the brand. You figure out what you want and then you build the brand.
Kritika, wrap-up comments from you. And do you believe that India is, in a sense, going to play incubation center for a lot of companies like yours?
You know, in India, we are just getting started. You know, even if you think of internet overall, about 200 million people on the internet, but there's still more than 1 billion people to connect. So there's a lot of room for innovation. And it will be about doing things differently.
Shiv, wrap-up comments, please.
No, I don't think that Indian brands can do what they've done here globally. And that's a no-starter. So if you start here, multinational firms came into developing and emerging economies and said, bottom of the pyramid, serve the needs of the underserved. I think the Indian companies have to do the opposite. They have to go and start thinking of the middle of the pyramid or the top of the diamond. Doing what they're doing here in Africa or Venezuela or Colombia is the best way to lose. Okay, that's not going to work. So they need to think differently. For that, they need to invest in brands, in innovation, and huge managerial competence that somebody mentioned.
So we're not poised for takeoff at this point in time in your assessment?
With the current thinking, no. You have to think differently. You have to go for the, the middle of the pyramid or the top of the diamond and really say, and people have done it. High Design is doing that. Shanaz Hussain is doing that. Himalaya is doing that. There are people who are actually, showing us the way.
Rajan?
Outside of IT services, India has 5 technology product companies that have over $1 billion valuation. Right? 3 of them are public, 2 of them are private. China today has 21 technology product companies that are public that are over $1 billion. Today we are creating $1 to $2 billion companies every year in the technology space. They're a mix of global and local. So I think technology for India, I think is one of the sectors that will be unique, where you can build very large companies only focused on the domestic market. Product e-commerce is 5 billion this year, will be 50 billion by 2020. We will have several companies that will have north of $10 billion of revenue in only e-commerce, only in India. So clearly, you can build very large. But at the same time, we also will have companies that will be born in India and instantly global.
Yeah.
So, tech is one area where we'll see both of these, and they're happening at scales that we've never seen before.
That really is the one sector where we've seen that happen. Manu?
Well, I'm in the camp that says, look, this is a great, big market. Do what you do well here. Create some unique business propositions for yourself, and then find markets where this proposition can really be differentiated to whatever you've got.
Are you in the Shiv camp or are you in the Pawan Munjal camp? Do you believe that we're poised for takeoff, or do you believe that there's still work to be done?
I believe there's still work to be done. And we've got to go slowly. There's no big bang that's suddenly going to allow us to grow global.
Pawan Munjal, I don't think people are skeptical of your story because of the kind of market share and the dominance that you've enjoyed for over 2 decades in the Indian market. You're already the world's #1 motorcycle manufacturer, so nobody can quibble about your story. But the larger Indian brand story is where the concerns lie. Do you agree with the point of view that's just been made?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that point of view. But coming back to my own story and my own challenges, I think the customer and the markets are what we really need to understand, and understand very quickly, and be able to develop products and technology to service those customers. The other one, of course, clearly is the brand, to create brand awareness. Wherever we go, those customers, those countries...
Which is why you went to FIFA.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Ms. Anand.
I think to really stay alive in the long run, you have to start doing both. India has phenomenal potential for growth, so you've got to focus and grow here and increase your share here. But you need to go global too immediately. The sooner you go, the better, because the first mover advantage, especially in developing countries, emerging economies, is phenomenal. We have advantages there, and we have an inherent advantage of being able to adapt there better than the MNCs.
Molly, which side do you belong to?
I think firstly you got to be good at something.
Yeah.
Once you're that, I think just again reverse the game. I mean, all the foreign brands that are strong in India today don't wait for their home markets to get saturated. They entered India even when their home markets had potential for growth. Because there are two things happening in parallel. One is your readiness, but second is the market where you're wanting to go, is that market getting locked out? And if you wait permanently to get ready, you might be in a situation where the market you seek to go gets locked out. And I think you've got to balance these two factors. I would be in the camp of saying once you're good at something, go. And then that brings us to the question of how do you go?
Yeah.
And is it organic or is it acquisition? And I think each business has a point of view. But partly it's also then the financial capability. And I would say if you have a super strong India P&L, then you can go organic. Because organic tests your P&L.
Supriyo.
I think the right point being made is that you've got to do what you got to do in India, but I think you can't wait too long. Markets will get, as Molly put it very eloquently, locked out.
The final word.
So it reminds me a bit about what Donald Trump said on your program.
I'm glad you're watching CNBC TV 18.
I was watching it, yes, misguidedly, but I was watching it. And there was Trump saying, asked about the Trump brand, going into ties and men's clothing. And mattresses didn't make much sense. He said, that doesn't matter. He said, but what he did say, which I think was really the point, was that the quality of the development, if you build, whether this is right or wrong, I don't know, but if you build a Trump building, you know that it's high quality, and that's what the brand has come to mean, but getting the quality right. So at the end of the day, I think if I can be in the both camp, I mean, Indian brands that have not got the dominant position that Hero, for example, have to focus on the domestic market. Those that do have the dominant position have got to start thinking about positioning. I hope that our branding survey will do one thing, which is a little bit off, but it gets my agenda into CNBC, and that is this. Most companies have become too focused on cost, too focused on making their numbers through the cost. The opportunities are infinite, at least until you get to 100% market share, if you start to develop the top line. And what we have to do is to shift the focus. None of the people I'm referring to are in this room. None of them are our clients, but other people's clients are too focused on cost, too focused on the quantitative, and we have to get the top 50 brands in India. If you plot them and you made them an investment fund, consistently outperform the index. Strong brands mean better TSRs, and just finally, if brand India is strong, it means more FDI, more investment activity as opposed to consumption, and that will fulfill the Prime Minister's vision and dream, and it'll be make it in India, and people will come to make it in India because brand India will be strong.
All right, on that note, gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on this special appointment. Lots of thoughts here on the table of what Indian brands should do as they look at charting out their journey outside of India. I think we've got examples of Indian companies who've consolidated their position, achieved a level of dominance in the Indian market, who are now well poised to chart out their journey, but perhaps others will have to find a very unique proposition, will have to find a key differentiator, will have to go to the market with something special in order for them to be able to compete in a commoditized market, which is what the global marketplace essentially is. Will it be organic growth? Will it be inorganic growth? Will it be debt? Will it be technology joint ventures? I think those are the options that managements will have to explore as they try and build this journey forward. But my many thanks to all of our panelists here for joining us and giving us their ideas on what Indian brands can do to go global. Thank you very much for watching.